Hello, hello. We are at the top of the hour. Welcome back to SME Suite. This is Nicole Baldessari, your host and the strategic activator at Beyond Academics. And if you can't tell by my grin from ear to ear, my cheeks literally hurt. I'm so excited for this conversation today because it's something near and dear to my heart as well as Beyond's heart and these folks that we're bringing up on stage as well. And that is the topic of innovation. So the reason I got really curious about innovation, one, I feel like I'm a disruptive personality. Any personality test I take says I think outside of the box, all of these things. So I never really fit into a specific role or mold. But beyond that, having come up through higher education, working at startups in products as well as services now, it's interesting to me to see where the innovators lie within a campus, and whether that's an innovation lab on campus or a center for excellence in innovation, directors of strategy, all of these things, or looking outside of a campus to understand, is it really these consultants just like Beyond and some of the folks we'll have on stage, some external factors that really bring in the innovation for higher education to change and move the needle. If you joined us last month with Greg Sattel, his argument is that all change comes from the outside. So I'd love to introduce everybody that we have here for our SME Suite today, so we can put that point to practice and see, where does innovation happen? Is it best suited internally, externally, a combination of both, or what have you? So I will welcome our guests on stage and run through a little bit of housekeeping. I see folks are using the chat. That's great. Please let us know where you're tuning in from. We also have the ability to bring you up on stage if there's something that us and the panelists are talking about and you're really passionate. Please feel free to say, bring me up on stage, and we will get you in, kind of like a live clubhouse style. And yeah, really excited to dive in this today. So Matt, my AV club, if you could show me the rest of our panelists so I don't feel like a talking head here all by myself.
They just have to turn on their cameras.
Okay, come on back, everybody. I hate being all alone up here. So joined with me today, I have Mickey Baines as well as Steve Johnson. So Mickey, why don't you give us a little bit about you and what you're most excited to dive into on today's topic?
Well, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mickey Baines. I'm a president at Kennedy & Company, higher ed strategy firm. We help schools with multiple types of strategies, from general higher ed strategy as well as technology advisory and strategy. I'm excited to have this conversation. I want to hear both sides. I typically will be in the middle. I think there's going to be some internal and external, so I'm really excited to dive in. At heart, I love growth, whether that's personal growth, institutional growth, enrollment growth. I'm always thinking about what's next. Where do we focus? How do we know what to focus and prioritize next? So when it comes to innovation, I could spend days upon days building ideas and building plans to prioritize and implement those ideas.
Amazing. And I can attest, Mickey is quite the innovator. So we are in good company. And what you just said about growth and having that growth mindset, Steve and I were on the phone yesterday, kind of prepping for today's session. And I said, I think that's the underlying, charge that we are also driven towards, is that appetite for growth and growth mindset. So Steve, let me bring you up and introduce yourself and what you're excited to talk about today.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me today, Nicole. Really appreciate it. So Steve Johnson, I'm an independent consultant right now. Time in higher ed at Southern New Hampshire University, and most recently at National University, where I was Senior Vice President of Innovation. I think where I'm really excited is sharing some ideas. I've been working, one of the projects I've been working on is with Raheem Rajan. I see Raheem in the feed. Hi Raheem. We've been co-writing and doing some work and really poking at this idea of innovation in higher ed, and sort of reflecting on the past 20 years, where this idea of disruptive innovation following Clay Christensen hasn't really emerged, and really questioning the whys of that. And so really excited today to look at, like, are we really going to achieve what we think we're going to achieve inside of an organization? Or do we really need to look at some other models if we're trying to be disruptive or transformative to the sector? So really excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So I guess that's a perfect way to open the floor. That question that you just posed, Steve, is it disruptive? First of all, maybe dispel disruptive innovation, because I think
Sure.
this topic itself, it just feels like, whoa, in your face, disruption, innovation. You have to have like a crazy mad scientist background.
It's emotionally charged. Absolutely.
Yeah, it has this connotation off the bat. But I want everyone to be rest assured, like, innovation is attainable, and it can be done sustainably with small steps. So Steve, if you just kind of want to set the table a little bit, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, how I think, thanks, Nicole. How I like to think about it is, if you take a spectrum, and on one end you have an existing, and this is kind of comes out of Clay Christensen, it comes out of work from Jeffrey Moore, a great book by Elliot Parker that just came out, really thinking about creativity and change and innovation. But so if you start on one end, you have an existing organization where if you go to the innovator's dilemma, that existing organization can innovate, but usually it's going to be a sustaining innovation. That's an innovation that drives efficiency or promotes growth within that existing organization. It's not something that's going to change that organization.
Maybe not so sexy and less talked about.
Yeah, and those things are fine. I'm not disparaging them, but they are limited and incremental. And then on another end of the spectrum, you have new ventures, new ideas, launching new models that bring together different disciplines and those kinds of things. And for Christensen, especially when you're addressing new markets or people who are not being served well by a current organization, that's where disruption, transformation, and those kinds of things happen. So we see often in higher ed, in existing organizations, you have an internal innovation unit funded by operational funds. On the far end, you have venture funding, whether that's through a venture studio, new startups. I see Dan Futrell is here, who's founding.
Oh yeah, hi Dan.
Yeah, Dan's launching off with Polymath University right now, so that's a great example, of something on that other end of the spectrum. And then you have things in the middle that are sort of capital ventures, meaning the organization funds a new idea, but it's away from the core of the organization. And in fact, I think in higher ed, we've seen probably the most successful, closest things to transformations happen in those spaces with the ASUs, SNUs, WGUs, and kind of where they set those things up.
That's good. Mickey, would you agree, elaborate, anything to add to this spectrum or your observations?
So I like where Steve's really thinking about that. I would agree. I think the hard part is when it gets out of the mission. So how do we sustain that and having a model, because a multitude of things could come into play that impact the ability for that innovation to be truly successful or limit how successful it can be. There could be leadership changes. There could be funding model changes, especially if it's a public institution. Could be, if it's a private institution, could be changes in the market that start to restrict what they have. And when I think about something that starts to fall out of the mission, there's a criteria that you want to think about and consider. If it's not within our true mission, how do we prioritize it and how do we think about it? And how can we also look at it as a way to be self-sustaining so that while it's out of the mission, we get it started and it can be successful and live on its own without needing to continue to pull from the primary parts of the institution and maybe contribute back to the institution. I was on a board for a while of a nonprofits organization here locally where I live, and it's an arts organization. So when they're looking at a venue where they might be bringing people in for musical performances, they had a mission, and they had a lot of performances they could bring up into the organization to perform that really didn't fit the mission. Does ZZ Top fit this? Is that the artist you want? Right. And so what we had to debate there and think about, how, to what extent do we need revenue? To what extent do we need to be sure that we're mission fit and look at that? So we had this criteria to evaluate when we're looking at an instance, what is worth something that's low mission but high profit, or that is high mission but low profit, and finding that balance, which really helped the institution start to weigh those types of opportunities. Now, this is, to me, often a very much larger scale, a lot of these types of innovations, but it's finding that balance, I think, is an important piece when you're making a decision, to what extent do we venture out for this new innovation?
And I think the secret recipe for that profit to mission ratio might be wrapped around in strategy. I know it's this intangible thing that everyone says they have a strategy, but very rarely do I find that there is a clearly defined strategy that incorporates the mission and has underlying tactics. Like, what is it? The 5 whys. If you can ask the 5 whys, that's where you'll find the strategy. And I think it's important too. Myself, I identify as a strategic activator, my 2 Clifton strengths. But I mean, Mickey, you work at a strategy consulting firm, and Steve, you've led strategy for these innovation hubs within campuses. Do you have any thoughts on strategy and how these institutions can be more strategic when they're looking at innovation? Because everybody wants it, right? Everybody says, we are going to build the brightest, best workforce of tomorrow. And all these strategic plans actually, to me, lack strategy because they all say the same thing. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how we can break that down for people and make it a lot more clear as to how it relates to sustaining that innovation mindset.
I have lots of thoughts.
Good. That's why you're here.
and some of it is generally my dissatisfaction, right, with the ability to do that. And this is not limited to higher education. I'm in an organization called Innovation Leader, and they're a group of they bring chief innovation officers from across corporate America to discuss these things. And they've been having great conversations. Is the chief innovation officer position dead? And what the framework of the conversation is innovation theater and the difficulty of that internal innovation. So I think I'm going to get to your question, but I mean, just this idea of these sustaining innovations that happen inside an existing organization can be very difficult for all kinds of reasons that start with even just the expectations and the definitions. What is innovation? Because you ask 30 people, if they don't have some kind of basis from it from Clay Christensen or somewhere else, it's everything. And so, the time frames, the what's really happening. Elliot Parker has this really nice thing where he really talks about the challenges, which is organizations are driven to be efficient and to grow, where innovation is inherently experimental. Innovation is finding new paths. And so those things are often at odds, especially the metrics that are happening. You have a CFO who wants ROI. They want immediate impact. They want things to unfold very quick. Low-hanging fruit, quick wins, all of these kinds of things that come out of these discussions, when actually you're supposed to be pathfinding into the future, if you're thinking about innovation and so then you go to the other end of the spectrum and you think about an innovation portfolio that's run by a venture studio, where they know 80% of the things on the table are going to fail, but it's managed and it's intentionally learning. And so I think you can set that up internally to an extent if you have the right perspective and you have a leader team that's ready to make bold decisions and they understand what the game is here, and it's not to immediately increase enrollment. I mean, those kinds of innovations exist, but they're not really innovations. They're just dropping things in that you bring in a new technology in or
Yeah.
something. So I think that's some of the framework of decision making here is like, are you trying to really be experimental, or are you trying to immediately impact your business needs to keep your, some
Is
of
there
those
room for experimentation, or is the business need so great that you actually don't even have the runway to do the innovative thing because you're plugging holes because the ship is sinking, whatever it might be, right?
Exactly. I that cool thing I want to develop in 5 years. If my organization isn't here in 5 years, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And
Well, I
Mickey,
think that outcomes are really important.
Yeah.
So, right, if you can't, if your enrollment's tanking and you're trying to be innovative, if you don't have the runway to be innovative, then you're going to be stuck doing what you've done, and what you've done has got you to where you are today.
Yeah.
Like there has to be some way to innovate and shift what it is you're doing. And I think, the key is, what are those outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And I think I saw a comment coming out, what goals need to be realistic. You're talking about the 5 whys. To me, that connects a little bit back to an approach that Amazon has. I spent a lot of time kind of studying this. They take the 5 why approach when they're doing it. But when they're going to take upon a big initiative, if it's Amazon Studio or Prime when it was being created, they would create their document. They would create that they would all have to commit to as a leadership team. They just called it the PR FAQ. It's a press release and frequently asked question model. So you would write today, we're going to commit to this. Today, when we're committing in this document. It would be written as if it's in the future, as if whatever the project is going live today. It's a press release for it, and it follows by frequently asked questions. It's not a 1-pager. It is a 6-page document that really defines exactly what the project is, what the outcomes that you expect are, who is involved, how they're involved. That's a lot of extra detail.
Yeah.
We don't get to that point in higher ed very often, to that level. And then the other piece is
no, sorry, I just got to double down. Commitment.
It's that commitment, and a lot of it is. And Steve, you talk about
issues in higher ed. What? No.
Well, Steve, you talk about failure. We're afraid of failure. I get that. Every person is afraid. Their level of fear and where the fear comes into play might vary, but it's not that you have to be afraid or you can't be afraid. It's knowing when to pivot, and that's the piece of it. So if I know I've got this 2-year effort going in, I'm not waiting till I'm 30 months in to say this is not going well. I'm going to look at it in 6 months. If this is a 2-year effort, where will we be in 6 months? What has been done?
Very disciplined.
Yes. And then you can say, it's time to pivot this. It's time to accelerate. It's time to kill it. I'm making that decision, but you insert those along the way. And if you do that, you're not spending 30 months and 20% more than you thought you're going to spend before you have a failure. You're going to cut it short earlier. And then that helps make the failure more easier to accept. And then to move to something else. It's creating those types of processes and mindsets that allow the innovation to occur.
And can I just pause?
Can I add something to that?
Yeah,
sorry.
We're all like, let's go.
What Mickey just framed there, though, is really important because it's a different set of metrics that matters. Yeah. It's not like, hey, is this going to bring ROI? It's
right.
I understand I have a hypothesis. I have something that's driving what I'm experimenting with. And then I'm going to make decisions through gate stages as I go forward on whether it continues or not. I think that's really important to flip.
Yep. For big things, you have to do that. You can't wait years into something to say this isn't working.
So higher ed can't wait? What's happening? All these revelations.
They can, but then you see the impact of what happens if you wait that long.
We see the schools closing one a week. I mean,
there's schools closing. I mean, you can go back to look at years. Ohio State spent 10 years trying to implement with Workday. And this is nothing about Ohio State or Workday. It's just the project. They, took a long time to be into that project before they said, this isn't going to work. What I like to see is, how do we assess along the way so that we know it's not, and then we can make corrective action to get it where it needs to be. And then also set additional timelines. And well, it's not working. We're going to do this instead. We want to see this result. Here's a timeline that we can see progress. And you at least have an opportunity to cut those ties earlier on a project if you need to.
I do want to hop to the chat, so
Yep.
I'm glad that Dan's comment got brought up. There are so many good nuggets in the chat right now. For Dan, it sounds like we need operational stress to innovate internally. How does that make you feel, both of you? That comment. I feel to me, I'm like disheartened. We really need to be under pressure to innovate internally.
Well, I think operational stress certainly accelerates the need to innovate. And I think if you are operating that way, you might be operating that way because you're afraid to innovate otherwise. There's not a culture of it there. And because you get to this point of fear, now you know you have to. But
doesn't the risk get greater when you're under those operational pressures? So is there really appetite to innovate, or is it not sustainable because the risk is so high since you're already in a bad spot? You know what I'm trying to say?
It depends on how aligned people are, I think, to start with, right? And what the solutions are and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. And in a complex organization, that's really challenging, or can be very challenging in the space, because again, it can feel like, oh, we're cutting, because you're going to have limited resources, limited in both in terms of funding as well as people. You have to create capacity to innovate. You can't just put it on the shoulders of like, oh, this is also part of your job, your day job now. To quality of it, but that it then sometimes feels like we're throwing a bunch of money away and blowing it over here trying to innovate in new directions, when if somebody would just give me x number of dollars over here, I could buy this thing and it would fix everything. And so it's also this sort of, and there's also like, I'm an innovator too. I can innovate, and I believe everybody can, but it can create like these sort of things of like, why do they get to do all the cool stuff over here? And this also is, I think it adds to the operational feeling of stress, that both, it compounds that stress potentially.
Speaking of compounding stress, Jim, welcome to the
stage.
I'm kidding.
Hey, Nicole.
Hey, come on up. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, we're super late, so we've got my name tag on. I'm getting ready to go help students move in. We're on a quarter-based school, so.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, we don't start school till next Monday, which is crazy to me.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I like some of the things you're talking about of, man, we are hesitant, and I'm always applaud anybody that has the moral courage and professional courage to not sink into the sunk cost fallacy of, you've got so much invested, we just have to keep going. And somebody finally says, no, let's pull the plug on that. That is not the direction. I mean, it seemed like it was, and maybe we're getting a lot of good benefits out of that. So let's take the good stuff out of that, but don't continue to throw it in the money pit if that's not the direction we're going. But when I mentioned best practices, when do we recognize there's that shift? Is it technological shift? Is it some opportunities or other threats out there? You're kind of doing your environmental scan. So what's shifting, and how do we prepare our organization to handle that? So, AI, of course, is top of mind for everybody, every institution.
What?
Everybody's trying
AI?
to think yeah. But how do you handle that? And a big one I always look at is best practices. And this is, you're always looking at something Matt's looking at when every time a company comes out, you're engaging somebody in a new implementation of technology. And oftentimes their best practices, the consultants come in and tell you like, hey, this is how you should use it. And you're like, I think that was written for your last version or the version before that. But everything based on what is currently available to us, we actually, not knowing and dealing with everything that you brought as baggage, have a chance to now define what is the current best practice. And actually, I have to get myself in gear. I have to write an article on wrapping up a series on best practices and stuff by November 1st. So this is kind of top of mind for me.
We should do a session on that, Jim. This is Matt. I'm the background, but
we hear you, the voice of Oz.
We should do a session on that best practice stuff. So yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So can I jump in a little bit? And because I think this is a great topic. First, I will say, to be transparent, I don't love the term best practice. I use Adam Grant's term of better practice.
Thank you.
I like better practice because best infers that you've already reached the top. Right. So if it's best practice today, it should just be the current practice tomorrow, and we're starting to work on what's next. I will say And given that I do a lot of work in technology, when you think about the implementation, that's an expensive thing to dive into, cost wise, time wise. I'll tell you how I look at it, Jim. And you know, when we look at, there's a new technology. Say you got a new CRM or a new piece of technology. So you know, it's what can the technology do? But first, what is it you're trying to achieve as an institution? So if you're working in enrollment management, are we trying to improve the class? Are we trying in terms of academic quality, in terms of size, in terms of reach? Let's know those top priorities before we implement, because once we know those, we know where to focus implementation and where to push. Because if, say, your new tool has 30 new functions and features that you don't currently have, well, I don't know that you need all 30. Let's look at the ones of those that will best help you achieve those top priorities. Maybe there are 10 of them. And then we want to look at the baggage you bring with you to know how ready you are to use those 10 and what do we need to do to guide your team towards those 10. I always look at technology usage in an academic model. So if you describe to me your needs, we've got these goals and what I need from a technology perspective. Let's say that's operating at a CRM 301 level. That's near advanced, but pretty high level. But where are you today? If your team is at a 101 level, then I know what I need to be teaching you to get to 301. Without knowing that gap between, I can put things in the practice or put them into a tool, but I don't know that your team's ready to adopt. That helps us understand what the adoption plan looks like so that they're ready to use, not just know where to click and what to do, but what is the context that they're getting in this new feature and function do, and how does it help them achieve their work? Because technology, we can't do enrollment management without it, but it's really there to support what your team needs to be doing. And so once we know the goals, we know what the team needs to do, now we know what the technology needs to do to support them in doing that. You know, that's a piece. The AI piece, I'll just say, add this to AI. One of the things I've learned over the last few weeks with AI, you know, a year ago, I would come into working with a client with an internal starting point, a bias to say, let's streamline because there's too many tools. For IT or enrollment manager, whoever's supporting it, it's hard to support when you have all of these various tools out there. But with the advent or the add-ons of AI, what I'm seeing is a need to have more tools, because a bigger platform, and our team supports all the big platforms in higher ed from a CRM perspective. But from a platform perspective, they typically are a little further behind than a point solution who's building an AI
specialized for that.
And so you might find a need where you're going to need to put those point solutions. In fact, I was at a conference last week, and I think it was not an industry specific conference, but they were looking at, you know, the average number of tools that you have is relative to the improvement you're going to get in your outcomes. And they're saying, you know, if you have at least 10 integrations into your CRM, you can see an 8% improvement in, you know, those types of things. So you're seeing, I think, an emergence of more need for some of those point solutions. But at the end of the day, if you can't fully use them and they don't all connect, that's, I think, the key is, because that stat was based on integrations, not the number of tools, the number of integrations. If they don't all talk and work together, it's going to be siloed and it's going to be more chaos. So I think that's really an important piece to it. I'll stop, because I could go for 3 more hours.
Integration's huge. I agree with you, and there's so much tied together. And where's that data coming from? But I like one thing you touched on. I was like looking at that list of, here's 8 things you should do to kind of approach tackling something, and usually technology is like number 7 on the list. And people usually put it like number 1, get them ahead of themselves, and like, no, it needs to be down here. You need to go through this before you actually start doing the technology piece.
That is my favorite point ever. And I said it to Matt the other day. It's like 80% of our budget is spent on 20% of the transformation, which is the technology itself. To me, and Mickey alluded to, you know, AI, and I heard in the chat, I really want to get Ryan Ivers up here because he made a comment about culture of an organization and how that contributes. I would love to talk about the human side of things and what we can do. Yeah, Steve, you want to jump in?
Yeah, can I jump in? Because I want to throw a flag, which I don't believe we're being transformative enough.
We talk about to see how many yards we're going to move back now.
I don't think higher ed has really transformed since the advent of online education. I think it's been very incremental. But I think we are fundamentally in the same kinds of models. So again, just to this is why I wanted to level set. I think our conversation here has been entirely around sustaining innovations, and I've been, again, with Raheem, we've been asking, like, how does a a public sector scale innovation, because higher ed has not been doing it well. And this is the flag I want to throw. I mean, we've had competency-based instruction in front of us for a decade. It was a decade ago that Michelle Weiss and Clay Christensen published Higher Education about this. WGU has done great individually, but the sector is not embraced mastery-based education, competency-based education in a way that benefits our students. We're really stuck. And I think part of that stuckedness is because we're internally focused, and we're focused on our brands and our enrollments and our efficiencies. And so I mean, I think we've really got to open our minds to, like, how do we push this stuff outside of the core? Because this becomes an IT discussion if you're internal, and this is what I'm sorry, I'm not like banging on you, Mickey, and
no, I love this. This is why
but I just really want to, like, I think there's a real opportunity here to kind of go, this is the current conversation, but if we're recognizing these drivers around us, from demographic drops to impacts of climate change. We're talking about AI in the near term, but like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, these kinds of things, we've got to, procedure number one is, like, figure out in your organization how to find models that get it as far as possible, whether that is finding that funding to start a new business unit that is incubating a different approach, and or even, you know, there's some of these ideas out there of, like, how do we start to think about venture studios and those kinds of things, and collaboratively funding those across not just institutions of higher ed, but across the sector, so workforce and those kinds of things, to really start driving some collective thought here. So sorry, that's my spicy.
No, we love the hot
contribution.
You just inspired me. I'm like foaming at the mouth. I would love to get Ryan Ivers up here to speak to the culture internal piece about innovation, if that's within the organization. And then I know Dan Futrell is here. He's literally disrupting with alternative education models. So I would love to have that internal and external happen. Hi, welcome on stage.
I was invited in. I didn't have anything to say, though.
Hi, Christine. Nice to see you.
No, I'm Christy. Nice to see you.
Hi,
too.
Christy.
Yeah. Hi.
Nice to see you.
Certainly think of something to say. Yeah.
So, Stephen, just one of the things you said there of just, you know, how long has it been since we've done something higher education writ large that you're recognizing as a true innovation? Maybe a lot of small innovations. But also the pandemic hit everybody with hyper acceleration of adoption of numerous different technologies, where I was having a hard time trying to convince people to use Zoom or Teams or anything else like that, or why would we ever want to do that? And my God,
we couldn't have done this 5 years ago. You're exactly right.
No, you go back to the Spanish influenza and everything like that, and people were taking classes via radio and sitting down and listening to that. So that was kind of a shift that happened a little bit there. But I look at things now like there's all kinds of vested interest in higher ed, where the methodology of how you're scaling something out, then you look at how many vested interests do we have in physical residential buildings and assets and all those sorts of things. And I've really never seen the shift. I keep advocating for this internally at my own institution. But a shift for, and some may do this and have good examples of that, but heightening what is the experience you cannot replicate that you can do at the residential level in person kind of thing. Would Larry and Sergey have created Google if they hadn't met up after a class at Stanford and had a little chat, a little talk? That wasn't that scheduled kind of thing where they had to be there. So those sorts of things, how do you make that incubator and just pinging ideas off of each other and do it much like we're doing here, but how do you really highlight what can we do that you cannot do and replicate somewhere else? Because otherwise, eventually you're just going to get to how do you commoditize higher education at scale? And then you're looking at how are you doing everything from competency based and everything, and then there's always the age-old determination coming from the registrar world and everything else of how do you lend that authenticity and that somebody's actually gone and verified, do you really know the competency-based thing? And how do you test for this? And
it's a complicated landscape and a complicated conversation, no doubt. So yeah, no, I guess I wasn't offering CBE as like panacea or anything. It's just an example. But yes, I mean, and even what are we going to do? You know, there is a movement towards hybrid education. People are thinking about that. Do we really understand? And this is where I get experimental. Do we really understand when humans need to be together and when they don't? Do we kind of do, but do we really as educators understand that and think about, and then what do we use campuses for if we stop having as many students on it? And are there other ways to inject those kinds of conversations that you were just suggesting? How do I have a water cooler conversation if I'm at a different kind of university, or I can't bump into somebody on a campus? I don't know, but I think those are you're
it's
raising
about the right questions, not having all the answers, right? Which, Ryan, I saw you're up on stage now, and I feel like this whole combo, competency-based education, in-person serendipity, lends itself well to your role at Southern New Hampshire. I mean, I'm assuming you're
very well.
Please tell me more.
Yeah. My name is Ryan Ivers. I'm an associate dean of CBE at Southern New Hampshire University, and don't mind the getup. I've been half preparing for the storm, half working today. So yeah, you know, I mean, I've been with SNHU for 13 or so years before Paul was Paul, you know, that we all know and love. So yeah, I mean, I've seen CBE, you know, I've seen it done fully remote. I've been doing this role for 10 years remote down here in Charlotte while everyone else is in New Hampshire, right? Okay. So first I want to dismiss, CBE is not a panacea. Find me on LinkedIn. I don't want to hear that ever again. Please. I can help, but please, it's not going to fix everything. You know,
I was just using it as an example.
Yeah, no, I know, Steve. I know. Totally fine. I don't want to see my LinkedIn inbox blow up here. But yeah, so, you know, it certainly has been, and I'll tell you, I'll be the first to tell you, we failed. We failed numerous times, a lot of times. You know,
you have the culture to be able to. This is what I want to keep roping us back in. Like, what can we do? What is the culture that you have where you are able to experiment? Because I unfortunately don't think this is the majority of campuses. They don't have that same structure. So if you could speak to that as well.
Sure. Yeah, this is very atypical, even from my consulting and other work. This is very atypical. Southern New Hampshire, we have a culture of, I don't know how to explain it. We really do. And the easiest way to explain it for me is that we really push through students first. And I know every university ever has that on their academic catalog and they're, you know, like, oh, we're actually students first. CBE is an attempt to get closer to that, right? So innovating on that, but we're also within a huge university. So we've gone through two phases here. First off, the CBE team was isolated from everybody, doing the whole disruptive innovation. We had a whole different office in town. It was literally like sequestered, you know, just do innovation, right? That worked well for the initial concept, keeping people involved. But then we had to move into the larger Southern New Hampshire University ecosystem. That's where challenges really began. Because at that point, you know, while we did have a culture that was really pushing students first, and we were all about, you know, failing fast, learning, and keep on pushing each other. It was difficult. You know, the culture continues to grow and continues to get better. But yeah, there's certain times where people have no idea, have nothing they want to do at all with CBE. But it's so, you know, change and innovation is so personal and relational, especially when it's remote, right? Like, because eventually, some people are going to have to do the new innovation you're talking about, right? So you need to really be careful with how you communicate the strategy, how you build that culture. And I mean, building culture is a whole 7-hour conversation we can't have here.
That'll be part 2.
Yeah. That'll be in my 10-day series. You know, but it's something that we always focus on and make sure that we're being honest with each other and everything like that, just like how you're supposed to collaborate. Obviously, it's difficult remote wise, but we make it work. We've been making it work for a very long time. I mean, there's no, we now, we just had September numbers come in. We're at 239,000 students. So obviously something's working. Something also didn't work to make what, because I mean, everyone looks at me at conferences like, oh my God, you guys are SNHU. Well, how do you do it? And I'm like, well, we only show you guys the good stuff.
Right.
like
it's like social media. You only put what you want to be seen out there, right?
Oh, I look beautiful on social media.
Yeah, my trips are fantastic.
Yes. Oh yeah. 6-pack abs, the whole thing. But yeah, you know, it certainly can be difficult. So I feel like I'm monopolizing. So please jump in, everybody.
So, you know, I think on the Dr. President LeBlanc, well, Dr. LeBlanc now, he made a comment to us when we were having conversations. He's been on a few of our events. Sure. He said he gave the right for certain organizations, certain aspects to fail because he knew there was a risk tolerance to that. So he basically said, hey, we got to do the operational. He had these 3 categories, and one was about risk. And those projects had the leeway to potentially be a failure because he knew that it could become a failure, but if they were successful, they would be amazing, right? So he invested in that, and that was just something that he said to us in terms of he still had to do operational, he still had to do the sustainability, and then he had this risk. I can't remember exactly the 3 that he used, maybe Ryan knows, but there's a risk tolerance that was allowed at that moment.
Matt, what I would add to that though is he also set those up away from the core, and so he was managing those. You know, Paul is, he knew Clay Christensen very well and was very much trying to bring what Clay's work into higher ed. And so when you look at like College for America, which was the basis for what Ryan's doing right now, you know, that was it. It did fail in many ways, as Ryan recounted. It was also its own individual business unit that was capital funded with its own profit and loss, right? And so I think that's really important to flag in this conversation. It's not just the culture of failure; it's also a structure that was really plotting and well set up to explore innovation.
And the other thing I would say, Matt, to what you're saying is the second half of it was the evaluation of its potential, so that and to me, what that means, we've prioritized opportunities, and we're going to focus on the ones that, in this case, we're setting criteria for priority on what gives the best return. And so the key is you've got 100 ideas. You can't act on 100. You have to determine how many you can truly act on and execute on. Maybe that's 3, maybe that's 10, but knowing what the criteria are that we're trying to use to evaluate, assess, and bring them down to that magic number, then you can act on them. And I think those are really key pieces of moving from idea to actually starting the work.
The most experiments you can run for the least amount of money, to your point of like, what do I have the resources to do and how do I prioritize?
Yeah. And we've got some fresh faces on our stage here. So hi, Fabi. Hi, Christy. If you have anything to add, please jump in.
So really quick, I just want to let
Matt, come on now.
The comments are blowing up. Like it's amazing how much content is being written by people, right? We're just trying to get people up on stage because the comments are so good that, you know, so anything that you're seeing, Fabi, is it? And Christy, give us your thought. You've been listening to us, you know, in terms of it. Would love your thoughts on what you're hearing in terms of the innovation. There's so many different variants. We had Southern New Hampshire, we had University of Oregon, right? So we have all these different people coming in with the concepts. We'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about the conversation. And Christy, I know you came up and then we dropped you somehow, so we're glad you came back up. So.
Well, thanks for inviting me to the stage. I worked with Steve. We were really good colleagues.
No way.
Yes, we worked on really neat, innovative, future-facing projects to help inform the class of 2030. So definitely, I would say that the Innovation Center at the time was a very vibrant hub for innovation. I also had experience with College for America with Ivan. I was the institutional research analyst there.
Wow.
And so made the transition over to the data analytics team and learned a lot from operations and really benefited from those experiences. So both on the operational side and on the innovation side. And of course, right, working within a very large, complex organization is not easy. And so today in my role at the Education Design Lab, I feel like I have learned so much and can have so much empathy for those who are in higher ed who are trying to innovate in order to better meet the needs of the learners whose needs are not being met. And so, so there's a lot of empathy, right? So when we're talking to those on the ground trying to stand up micropathways, stackable short-term credentials, it's really hard. And so I think not having gone through what I went through at Southern New Hampshire University, I wouldn't know, everything that's entailed on the side of both operations and innovations, and sometimes within institutions that don't have the budget that SNU had for the innovation, and which makes it even harder. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, well said. Christy, anything from your side on that?
Yeah, well, Bobby, I appreciate just hearing you talk about the students who we're serving at this point, and really thinking about who has changed a lot and what the goals are has changed a lot, as well as how we're serving students, and we're all working differently as well. I mean, I'm thinking about how, particularly with the pandemic, but also just with changes more generally, we're all working together as part of virtual organizations, which is another layer of change. And just kind of thinking about organizational culture and the kinds of cultures that can lead to innovation, whether it's in education or some other field. Working together remotely is another, I think, big piece. And I was resonating with the comments about complexity and just how many layers of change are happening. And so, some of the recent comments, I think, have really spoken to the ways that the goals of education have changed and the innovation is happening in terms of what we're aiming for, not just how we're doing it. So,
yeah, no, that's a really important perspective. And I keep coming back to this idea of serendipity because I think it falls in the like glitzy innovation bucket. Like they have these big aspirational kind of contexts, but it's really true. And Ryan just posted in the chat, would Southern New Hampshire be the same without Paul playing basketball with Clay in Boston? Like these little interactions, these human interactions, not saying, whoa, I went on this crazy machine and it did, like, no, the human interactions are the ones that are powering these innovations and these mindsets. And to kind of bring it all back and talking about these human skills, there are skills that will unlock human potential. And one of them is innovation and visionary thinking. Like these are, I don't know if anyone follows Todd McLeese here and his voice on this topic of human skills in the AI economy, but I used to think that innovation was this, you're born with it, only, people who are born with this futuristic mindset. Like when I met Matt, for instance, I was like, whoa, I could never think the way Matt thinks. And the more that I'm unpacking what innovation really means and the different kinds of personalities and mindsets and attributes and skills and roles that fuel ongoing innovation, I realize like I am innovative. I am part of it. Just because I don't maybe have that visionary thinking muscle fully developed yet, it doesn't mean that I can't develop it at some point. So,
or you say it nicer than I do. Is that what you're saying? You say it nicer than I do?
What were you saying, Matt?
Yeah, you say it nicer than I do. You have the same opinion, but you just say it nicer than I do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. That is definitely true. But I will say, when I run into these big thinkers, I second guess myself. I get a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I'm like, whoa, I never thought about it that way. But I think if we all come together in that vulnerability and that shared space of Yeah, I never did think about it that way, but now that I've seen it and I know more about it, I can understand it and I can move in that same direction too. So I'm curious if there's any skills, Mickey and Steve, that have guided you through innovation, or if you want to touch on anything.
Well, you're hitting on some really important. I think you hit on a lot of the skills just as you were talking. So,
Hey.
but yeah. So I've done great specialization on Coursera. Institute for the Future has a futures thinking specialization, which is led by Jane McGonigal, if you know her work. But really what two things that are really important, or two skills that come up there. Futures thinking is this ability to get out and project and imagine, right? So having an imagination of what could happen, I believe, is really fundamental to coming back to go, where should we be innovating? And so I think to what you said is like, cultivating creativity. You can do that through practicing futures thinking, but there are many other different ways to cultivate creativity. And I think for me, that is like the number one skill. If you go to entrepreneurs and people who are in an organization trying to innovate within the organization, they're the people who do things like laterally connect stuff really well, or go, well, what about this? Or I was reading about this thing they did in this other industry. Can we try that here? So like somebody comes in and says, hey, we keep measuring programs and their financial performance, but if we want students to go down pathways, we need to think about like how the music industry does move from albums to buy the song and made that financially sustainable, for instance. So I think creativity and that curiosity to pay attention to everything are two of the key skills.
So here's where I would go with that. Not everyone has to be the innovator and creative person, right? There are creators and there are executors, people who take that idea and can run with it, and that might be their genius. So I'm really good at coming up with innovative ways to do things. I'm really good at prioritizing the things to say, these are the ones I believe can help us best. I'm not the best at turning them into real action. That's just, I'm not strong at that. But we have people on my team, that is their genius.
Yeah.
They can run 40, they could execute and implement 40 things before I could do 2.
Yeah.
I might be able to come up with 40 ideas where they could come up with 2. Right. And that's okay. And I think when you talk about Paul playing basketball with folks, you had to have the ideas, and then you also have to have trust in people can execute on the ideas. And so having the relationship with those people that also have those areas of expertise and genius is what brings it all together to turn it into fruition. Because there are a lot of people with a lot of ideas, some great ideas that never were executed on because that's not their specialty.
Yeah.
And that's not their instinct.
I feel so seen by what you were saying, because I think there can be a lot of stigma if you are an ideas person and you put forth a strategy, but you're not the executor. That's something I've had to kind of grapple with in being a strategic activator. Like, I am really good at activating the right people to do things and not be afraid to take that first step. But am I going to be the one going down and learning how to do it? For instance, this little graphic that I made to promote our session where we were like the floating heads, I went to a row on our team and I said, I could spend 6 hours trying to learn stop motion in Canva, or I know you have a little side hobby that many at Beyond don't know about, where you do this stop motion stuff. Would you mind helping me and executing this vision? And he's like, oh my God, absolutely. I'll be on a plane. It'll be so much fun. Yes. So it's knowing, even though it might not be their role on paper, what are these unique human skills or interests or hobbies that your team members have in order to execute a grander vision? It could be small scale, it could be large scale, but I think it all goes back to that team dynamic, that collective intelligence that we harness. Because I like to be positive on these things and have a bright outlook for the future. It can get dark and scary really quickly when we look at AI and all of these emerging trends, and we could go doomsday higher ed all day, but I don't think that's productive, and I don't think that moves us in the right direction for solving the problem.
So I know a couple of people were chatting, talking about books, to read books. So if anyone likes that idea of people in the execution, there's a book that This is
Perfect.
yeah, Patrick Lencioni. He's the guy who wrote the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's probably one he's most known for. But this one came out about a year and a half ago. I love it's actually influenced a lot of the work and how we approach our work. It works really well for project-based thing. But when you look at, here's an idea, something we want to, or here's this grand thing we want to achieve here, the ways we can do it. Let's prioritize the ways. Let's get buy-in and then go do the work. It divides it very well, and it helps you kind of understand what role you might best play in that. I've used that for our team. I'm waiting for the right opportunity to do it with a client team and see how our clients, where they fall in that matrix, because there are times when a project falls off scale because you don't have the right genius or the strength in the room for that. So it's had a lot of positive impact for us.
Can I address the whole thing about the innovator and the executors? I think the strongest leaders are the ones that recognize they're vulnerable to certain things, and they surround themselves with people who are able to support them, right? Soar with their strengths, support, all the things that others can do. I think the one thing that our society has is they make you feel like you have to be the expert in everything, that you have to have a PhD in something, or you need to have this. And the reality of it is, no, not everyone has even the aptitude or even the mindset to sit down and write and waste 6 years to doing something. But they have great innovative minds. They have very good executors. I think it's finding the right teams that have the right mission. I think mission is as important. The people at Beyond, like, we can hire tons of people, but they have to believe in the mission.
Values.
And they have to figure out where they sit in the train, and no seat is in the back, if that makes any sense. Everyone is as important, because that train won't move unless everyone's in their right seats. Now, do we have people in the wrong seats at times? Sure. I mean,
we're always growing, so
I'm in the wrong seat, and then Joe's kicking me out sometimes. Like, hey, you shouldn't be answering that question, Matt. Let me do it. Like, it's and you got to be okay with it. I mean, there's times where me and Joe have different opinions, and I respect the fact that we're going to have different opinions, and because in the end, we still have the mission collectively to go. So I think we don't have to be both. I think there's value to each one. Joe writes a whole book about it in terms of the bossy and the, Deloitte has business chemistry. Right? There's all these different places, and not being boxed into one is better than the other, because you need all of it to be really good organizations, So
I feel so warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, I have that sometimes.
Matt, you don't often go warm and fuzzy with us.
I know.
This is nice.
Felt like
we were
warm and
screaming
fuzzy
before,
today.
and now we're all soft and sweet. No, this is really awesome, and I appreciate everyone being here. I know we've got 3 minutes till the top of the hour, and we might hang out a little bit after if folks want to stay on. But I do kind of want to wrap this up in a nice bow, and I usually do a fill in the blank for our folks on stage, and if it's too much pressure, let me know. But I would kind of like to bring this back around and say maybe a fill in the blank around what does innovation mean for the future of higher education? If there's one takeaway that you could leave folks with today that hopefully is maybe a little more tangible and tied to how folks can actually contribute to this, because I think by evidence of the chat, everybody here is innovative in some way, shape, or form, or cares about changing our industry. How would you fill in that blank? And I'll start with you, Mickey.
I knew you were going to call me first. I knew it. So I don't know if this is the right fill in the blank, but here's when you were posing the question, here's what came to my mind.
Yep.
We're talking a lot of ideas and concepts that are grand in scale. Not everyone that will be attending this has the power and authority to create and operationalize the grand in scale. So sometimes it's okay to start small, because when I have innovated, and this is going back to when I was a practitioner, when I was able to successfully pitch an idea and execute on it, the key to doing that was starting the small and getting wins to demonstrate I knew what I wanted to do, how we could go about doing it, and that the results would come from that. And then I could pitch the next thing was a little bit bigger. And then the next thing was a little bit bigger. And it was building. That was how I built trust. So when I went into the executive council for the institution and said, I want to do this, and this is a little bit more out of the box than normal, I've already done something else. I've already said what I want to do, how I'm going to do it, and what I'm going to get from it. And then I could say, we achieved better, we achieved little less than what I thought, and here's why, and here's what I'm going to do to fix that next time. That level of detail built me credibility, and it built me trust, so that when I went to the next ask, I could be a little bit further out of the box. So you can be at any role and find your way to innovate for what you do. And then you can innovate for a team, a department, an institution. So keep that in mind.
Mickey's fill in the blank is innovation is baby steps.
There we go.
There we go. Steve, what about you?
So my dogs were agreeing with you, Mickey, when they replied. Leaders are innovators, and innovators are leaders. So I think that complements what Mickey's saying. And at any level, if you're trying to lead, leaders don't walk by problems. For my Army vernacular, leaders are always making their foxhole better for the next guy. So if you're solving problems at whatever level you're in, you're being creative and innovating. Yeah. I would then add, I still am a very big idea person, and I worry about this sector very much. We have 40 million people who have some experience in higher education and no degree. So this is bigger than our individual universities and colleges. And to go to my own book plug, there you go, The Illusion of Innovation by Elliot Parker. He lambastes corporate America. The drive to efficiency is impeding our creativity. And so really, are we being creative enough? And I think that's the challenge I would ask everybody to walk out of here with, is like, are we being creative enough, or are we really challenging the status quo, or are we just keeping comfortable?
Okay. So Steve would fill in the blank with the innovation is in the creativity, the creation, like pushing that envelope. Love it.
I kind of had two answers. Sorry.
This topic is just getting us going and keeping us going, and we could talk all day and I'd be here for it. But I know folks have to jump, and they are busy in the thick of campus things. And I really appreciate both of you for being here today. I am sweating because I'm so passionate about this subject, and I feel like things have just been going on, and I love it. The energy is palpable. So thank you again, Steve and Mickey, for joining me. And I'm really excited to keep this conversation going, and happy to have you both here by my side.
What a great topic. What a great topic. This is a lot of fun. Yeah. Thank you for inviting us.
So much fun. And thanks everybody for tuning in to the SME Suite, and we will see y'all next month. If you have questions, want to hang, we'll be here a couple more minutes, but otherwise have a great day.